Okay, hello, welcome to the town hall for mid-career QUFA members to be able to pose your questions about the university pension plan and what the transition from the Queen's pension plan to the university pension plan is likely to mean for you. Before we get to your questions, and I'll let the people that are listening from the comfort of their snowbound homes know that that's most of the audience today, what we're going to do is, first of all, I will introduce myself. I'm Elizabeth Hanson. I was co-chief negotiator this round. And the other half of that we is Rob Hickey, who will introduce himself in just a moment, who was the other chief negotiator. We're going to talk you through a little bit of the background and the features of the tentative agreement that we achieved and how it relates to the trade-offs between the UPP and the QPP. And then we'll take questions from members, and with any luck, those questions will be questions that other people listening have, so that there will be a kind of general education of us all about aspects of this very complex issue as they pertain particularly to mid-career people. So just to step back for a bit, I'm going to speak a little bit about the bargaining history of QUFA in relation to pensions at Queen's and how we've come to this particular pass that we're at the moment, recommending the transition from the QPP to the UPP. So, from my perspective, the story starts in 2011 when I was on the bargaining team, and QUFA and the university had a particularly exciting bargaining round. It was exciting insofar as it emerged over the course of bargaining that what the university was trying to do was to maneuver QUFA into a strike lockout position, which was something that had not happened before at Queen's, but that we were really getting pushed in the direction of job action. And what lay behind that, I mean, there were a number of issues, but the principal one was the desire on the part of the university to exact concessions around the Queen's pension plan, and specifically to force increased contributions from QUFA members and some other adjustments to the money purchase aspect of the plan. So they were costs to QUFA members with respect to the Queen's plan. And what was driving that desire on the part of the university was the fact that the plan at that point, and remember this is 2011, so in the still scarred aftermath of the 2008 crash, the pension plan had both a going concern deficit, that is, it didn't have enough money coming into the plan to pay for its liabilities going forward, and it had a solvency deficit, which is sort of an artifact of regulation. It's a deficit that is calculated by calculating what the total liabilities of the plan would be if the plan were to wind up tomorrow, or not the plan, but if the institution sponsoring the plan were to come to an end tomorrow in the fashion that private corporations like Sears and Nortel can. And so, burdened with this weight of pension deficit, the university wanted to scrape some money back from the compensation packages for QUFA members. QUFA got an overwhelming strike vote, and as a result of QUFA's ability to threaten countervailing job action, those concessions were limited. Nevertheless, it was a concessionary round of bargaining. And one of the things that it made clear to us was that the university did have the power and the willingness to bargain in a fashion that could change up the pension in some substantial ways, and that it was having its mind concentrated by the deficits that the plan was showing at that point. In 2012, right after this, this rough round of bargaining, the province imposed on the universities a framework for solvency payment. That is, it began insisting that the universities pay down the deficit that they were running with respect to solvency. And that involved deferral for a few years and then a regime of solvency payments that have actually begun now. So that right now there's a 6% tax on unit budgets to pay for the pension solvency deficit. As a result, the university stated that it wanted to get out of the pension business. And the way that it could do that would be to merge the QPP with a multi-employer jointly sponsored pension plan. That would get it out from under the solvency deficit, because if your pension is a jointly sponsored multi-employer plan, you are not liable for solvency payments. The logic being that if one employer goes down, there are other employers in place to cover the liabilities. So the university began looking at the possibility of merging the Queen's Pension Plan with the Colleges of Applied Arts and Technology Plan, also known as the CAT Plan, which QUFA found an alarming prospect because it's not a very good plan. It has very high contribution rates and very poor benefits. So it would have been a substantial loss for QUFA members. So at that point, QUFA, the Queen's administration, and other faculty associations and university administrations in the province began discussions about the possibility of designing a sector-wide, university-specific jointly sponsored pension plan. And so that's how the project of designing the university's pension plan, or the UPP, began. When we went into bargaining in 2015, the project had begun, and there was optimism about it. So in the course of that bargaining round, everybody behaved better. The university was reasonably cooperative and productive at the table. But one of the things that it really, really wanted was for QUFA, the United Steelworkers, and QP to all sign a common letter of understanding that we would continue in the process of designing the UPP, and that should the UPP be built and the unions agree that they could recommend it to their members, that consent for a conversion would be bargained, and that if that consent process fell within 6 months of the agreements expiring, that it would be part of regular bargaining. So it was that letter of understanding that shaped the situation that we found ourselves in this fall, when the UPP had in fact been successfully designed. QUFA felt that with certain kinds of offsets by the university, it likely could recommend it to its members. And we were within 6 months of the expiry of our contract. So in December, we speed bargained with the university a 3-year tentative collective agreement that focused on pension offsets, that is, new features for QUFA members and some specific monetary adjustments for QUFA members that would offset costs to them of the transfer from the QPP to the UPP. So at this moment, or in a couple of weeks, QUFA members are going to be asked to ratify a tentative collective agreement, all the terms of which are contingent on QUFA consenting to the merger of the QPP with the UPP, which QUFA can do on behalf of its members. But the ratification of the agreement and the consent vote are tied because all the terms of the new agreement are contingent on QUFA's giving its consent. If QUFA does not give its consent, because its members do not want to ratify the agreement, then we will have to give notice to bargain and start again. So that's the framework for today's session, and I'm going to turn things over to my co-chief negotiator, Rob Hickey, who's going to talk about the features of the UPP, how they compare to the QPP, and the offsets that we were able to bargain. So, Rob?
Thank you, Professor Hansen. So what I'm going to do is kind of walk through the comparison, but let me set the context briefly, because I think it's important to understand that I'm not presenting this as an either-or. Either we stay with the Queen's plan or we go with the UPP, rather. This is to help us understand what we currently have and the way that the new proposal or the proposed new university pension plan would operate. And the first point to make, you'll see on the slide there, is the significant change in plan design from a hybrid plan to a fully defined benefit plan. And hopefully you've received your pension statements and you have some understanding of the difference, but it's important to point out because Queen's is the only university amongst the three that have led the plan design of the UPP, which has this hybrid nature. So the University of Toronto and the University of Guelph both have fully defined benefit plans, so we perhaps have the most significant change going from a hybrid plan to a fully defined benefit plan. So if you look at your pension statement, you'll see two lines. The first line that says money purchase contribution, and that's the plan's defined contribution side, or it operates like a defined contribution pension. And below that line, you'll see the estimated defined benefit pension estimate for your normal retirement date. And depending upon your salary, your length of service, and a number of other factors, when you retire with the better of those two. It's a hybrid. So you have the defined benefit, which serves as a minimum guarantee or a kind of a safety net, and the money purchase, which operates like a defined contribution plan that may be better unless you happen to retire during a market downturn. So, over time, we would expect returns to be good, but our colleagues who would have retired in 2008, 2009 wouldn't have retired on their money purchase plan because when the market falls, that pension falls, and that's the fundamental difference with the defined benefit plan is employees don't bear the risk of market performance. You have a guaranteed pension based upon the formula of your years of service, your accrual rate, and your final average salary. And I'll go through how that comparison between what we currently have in our minimum guarantee and what the university pension plan has. The other major difference going from the Queen's plan to the university or the proposed UPP is that part of the reason why Queen's faces the special solvency payments is that it's a single employer or a single sponsor plan. And the government, for a variety of reasons, is inducing the creation of jointly sponsored plans. In other words, trying to mitigate risk by pooling pension assets, pooling sponsors into multiple employer pension plans. And that has an important implication for the way the plan is administered, governed, and managed. Currently, as Professor Hansen was explaining, at the time of bargaining, Queen's can demand changes to pension benefits or contribution rates, and QUFA and the other employee unions on campus have a right to bargain over those changes. But ultimately, the plan administration, how it's managed, the accountability of the investment fund managers are solely in the hands of the Board of Trustees, solely in the hands of the administration. Under the proposed UPP, shifting to a jointly sponsored pension plan, well, it changes to just that, a jointly sponsored pension plan, where you'll have a group of sponsors representing the administration and a panel of sponsors representing the employee groups. And together, the two panels essentially govern the plan. The sponsor board will be made up of 6 administration representatives and 6 employee group representatives. And at least initially, that would include 3 faculty associations, so 1 representative from the Queen's Faculty Association, 1 from Toronto, and 1 from Guelph. And together, those sponsor board entities would hire the investment managers, hire the administrators, and hold those individuals accountable. Importantly, that sponsor board also governs and has the authority over any changes to benefits or contributions. So if the plan experienced full funding or overfunding, as the Queen plan had experienced in the past, many pensions in those cases take a contribution holiday. Why? Well, if you're the employer, you don't have to make payments. Rather than raising benefits and continuing to make payments, you'll take a holiday and stop making payments. Under the jointly sponsored plan, rather than that sole choice being left up to the administration, the 2 parties have to come to an agreement and benefits can be enhanced. On the reverse side, if the plan experiences underfunding, the 2 sides have to work out whether the benefits would be changed or contributions increased. So again, governance is a important difference in the plan design between what we currently have in the QPP and what exists in the proposed university plan. The next line is perhaps the most important in terms of the value for employees at Queen's and the value of the pension plan in general. So what you see in the left-hand column under the QPP are the accrual rates for the Queen's pension plan. And you see 2 numbers there because part of our pension from Queen's integrates with the Canadian pension plan. So in your paychecks, at least for the first half of the year, you'll see you're making contributions to the Canadian pension plan, the CPP deductions. And your contributions are lower within that band of salary that you're making CPP contributions on. So the maximum yearly pensionable earnings for the CPP is currently $57,000. So you'll pay, you'll make your contributions to the CPP up to your earnings of $57,000, and then you'll notice that your paycheck suddenly gets larger. Well, that's because you're no longer making contributions to CPP. Your salary has exceeded the maximum yearly pensionable earnings for the CPP. When that happens, though, you start paying more into the Queen's plan. Why? Because it's not integrated at that level with the CPP. So you see 2 rates. Currently, we pay 1.4% for earnings below the CPP max of $57,000, and we pay 1.8%, or I'm sorry, we accrue benefits of 1.8% for earnings above the CPP. And again, that's to reflect the integration with CPP benefits. One of the hardest things to make a comparison between the Queen's plan and the proposed fully defined benefit plan is that the hybrid plan, the money purchase component, does provide enhanced benefits over and above the minimum guarantee. So if you look at your pension statement, certainly at the point in which you reach your normal retirement age of 65, for many faculty, that money purchase account will provide a richer pension than the minimum guarantee. Not for everyone. It depends upon salary and experience and a whole range of factors. And of course, ultimately at the time of retirement, it depends upon market experience. But over time, the actuarial assessments of how much value is contained in the money purchase over and above the minimum guarantee was about 10%. So on average, Queen's faculty are retiring on money purchase pensions at about 10% above the minimum guarantee. Now that varies. Some years, for instance, 2008, 2009, nearly all of our colleagues were going out on the minimum guarantee. More recently, you may have folks going out above 10%, but looking at it on average, 10% was the target figure. And the enhancement between the accrual rates of the QPP at 1.4 and 1.8% up to what the UPP accrual rates will be, 1.6% and 2%, that's about a 12.5% increase in the accrual. And what that means is you take the accrual rate, you multiply it by your years of service, and you multiply it by your final average salary, and that establishes your pension promise. That's what your benefits will be. It's something that is planned, that you can count on, and is irrespective to market performance, at least from the employee perspective. So that's the pension guarantee, and the UPP plan design met or slightly exceeded our objectives of having a plan value that had equivalent or slightly higher value than the QPP plus money purchase. Now, those enhanced benefits do come with higher costs. Now, you might say, well, why do we have to pay more and get the same or get a little bit more? Well, in part it's because the plan has to be fully funded upon inception, meaning you have to make sure that you're paying for the benefits that are promised. And one of the reasons why pensions universally have experienced problems is that pensions often count on future participants paying for the costs of current or past participants, meaning there's some intergenerational transfer of the costs borne of the benefits paid. Starting the UPP, you can't count on that. You have to pay for what you earn in terms of benefits, so the cost does increase. Currently, we pay 7% of our salary below the CPP max and 9% above towards pension contributions. Under the proposed UPP plan, those rates would go up to 9.2% and 11.5%. Putting that into kind of percentage terms of your payroll, that's about a 2.4% increase in your payroll contributions to your pension benefit. Now, I'll come back to that 2.4% in a moment when I talk about offsets. Now, part of the design of the UPP as a jointly sponsored plan is that it's a 50-50 cost-shared plan, meaning the employer has to match those contribution rates. And currently at Queens, Queens actually puts less into our pensions than we do in terms of the contribution rates. Queens is contributing 6% of the equivalent of our salary below CPP and 7.5%. Now, those numbers are a little bit deceptive. If I was an administrator for Queens, I would say, well, that's not accounting for the special solvency payments. If we include all the true contributions, those rates would be higher. But from an employee's perspective, what your actual compensation is those rates exactly. The special contributions aren't actually going to be putting more money in my pocket when I retire. It's actually putting money into the fund for benefits paid to people who have gone before us. So the Queens contribution rates increased to 9.2 and 11.5%. So there's an exact match in those contribution rates, an increase, a more substantial increase for the university than for us. The next item on the line, the normal retirement date, will be of particular interest to folks who have birthdays in July or August. Currently under the Queens plan, at least for academic staff, you retire, or your normal retirement date is July 1st in the year that you turn 65. So our colleagues who have July or August birthdays, I'm not sure if that's Gemini or Cancer, you have to wait almost until you're 66 then to reach your normal retirement date. Under the UPP and under the Queen's proposed tentative agreement, they would change that to be the last day in the month in which you turn 65. Now, as faculty members, that doesn't mean that we're simply going to retire in October if we're teaching a class and step out the door, but it does, I think, mean that, that colleagues won't have to wait almost a year before they can retire if their birthdays are in July or August. The last item I want to highlight in this side-by-side is the indexation, because this is another feature of the Queen's plan that is somewhat unique in most pension plans. And there are good aspects and downside aspects to what we currently have in the Queen's plan. So indexation is the mechanism by which pensions change to try and protect the value of the pension against inflation over time after you've retired. So you retire, your pension is set at a certain level. Indexation is the mechanism by which your pension may increase incrementally over time. The Queen's indexation model is based upon investment returns of the Queen's pension plan, meaning if the Queen's investment returns are greater than 6%, the retirees will experience an indexation to their pension for those returns above 6%. And in some years that can be quite valuable, quite robust investment returns translate into strong indexation. So many of our colleagues who retired in 2012, 2013, have seen their pensions increase by over 3% a year because the Queen's plan has experienced positive investment returns. Now, whether that continues and how long that continues is a question, and it really highlights the downside for our colleagues who would have retired in 2006 or 2007, right before the crash. Your pension cannot be reduced, but under the indexation formula, if the value of the fund tanks, well, your pension isn't reduced, but you won't experience indexation. You won't experience any enhancement to your pension until the investment returns catch back up to what they need to be for indexation under this 6% formula. So at the annual pension meeting in December of last year, the Queen's pension administrator announced that our colleagues who retired in 2007 still haven't received any indexation as a result of this model of requiring 6% return. So they've gone for 10 years without any indexation, whereas some of our colleagues have experienced 3% or more year over year. So again, it creates risk for individual employees based upon this market-based formula for indexation. The more common form of indexation, and what's in the UPP plan design, is indexation based upon increases in the consumer price index. So most pension plans peg indexation to increases in the consumer price index, and the UPP would pay 75%. It's listed as conditional 75% of CPI. Now, it's rated as conditional because it can be adjusted if that is one of the areas in which the sponsors choose to reduce benefits if the plan becomes underfunded. But by and large, I think this will be the basic formula that you'll see in most pension plans, either 75% or some other figure. And you might say, well, that guarantees a loss of value over time. If we look at what the actual performance of Queen's indexation versus this proposed indexation, they're largely equivalent. Why? Well, because you have to average out the people who haven't had any indexation for 10 years versus the people who get 3% compounded over each year. A 75% provides a more predictable and stable indexation for retirees. And again, it's more in line with what most pension plans provide. So these are the highlights of the plan design. I should point out two important changes that were not desired by QUFA, but imposed by government. And those changes relate to the artifact of being able to continue to work and draw your pension at Queen's, and the greater choice that Queen's members have for a variety of mechanisms for taking your pension. One of those mechanisms is taking the commuted value, and I'll explain what that means in just a moment. But if you recall back in 2004, 2005, colleagues who reached age 65 were obligated to retire. There was a mandatory retirement age. And around that time, the Charter Challenge essentially compelled employers to stop imposing or stop enforcing mandatory retirement as a kind of de facto age discrimination practice. So when Queen's stopped mandatory retirement, the pension plan didn't change its policies or procedures around when it would start paying out pensions. Historically, you retired at 65 and you started to collect your pension. Now you hit 65, you continue to work, at Queen's you can activate your pension. And this is somewhat unique. Certainly is not the practice at University of Toronto or University of Guelph. And for some members it can be quite attractive. It's attractive largely because at one point the federal government changed the pension income rules to allow for what we call pension income splitting. So individuals who have a spouse who perhaps doesn't have high earnings or doesn't have a pension, under pension income splitting, under that tax regime, you can apply some of your pension earnings to your spouse and therefore escape what would be a much higher marginal tax rate if you were taxed for your salary and your pension combined. Without that ability, of course, that becomes much less attractive. And it's not always the right choice. In fact, 75% of our colleagues currently working between age 65 and 71 don't take their pension, but continue to earn pension credits. And why do they do that? Well, for many people, you can have substantially larger pensions by continuing to contribute for a few more years. And you can make these calculations for yourself if you go to the Queen's Pension website. They have kind of this nifty self-service pension estimator, and it has all of your information, right? You have to log in through Solus, and you type in, well, okay, what if I retire when I'm 68 rather than 65? And when I did it for my own calculation, I retired at 65. I think my pension was estimated to be $84,000, and if I worked 3 additional years, my pension went up by nearly 20%. And that's a substantial increase, especially considering that your pension is then paid out for the rest of your life, and that increased pension will be paid out to your partner if you have one under the spousal joint survivor program. So when we look at the loss of this right during the plan design process, myself and my colleague Paul Young from biology, we both argued fervently that the new plan should maintain this kind of flexibility at Queen's. Frankly, our colleagues at Toronto and Guelph weren't convinced, but they weren't the real obstacle. The true obstacle was the government mandate that the new plan under no circumstances can allow this unique feature of the Queen's plan to continue. Now, what the government's reasons for are not entirely clear, but you may remember a few years back, the government came under fire, perhaps unfairly, but it came under fire for young teachers, folks coming out of teachers' college, unable to find work. And a scan of the active teachers revealed that there were many teachers collecting a pension from the teacher's pension plan and continuing to work in the classroom. And this really created a backlash, or a sense that this is double dipping. And so the government, I think, continues to react to that criticism, and that's part of the reason, I believe anyway, why they were so adamant that this not be allowed under the university pension plan. The other feature, one last point on that, ironically, if you continue to work past 65, and of course this doesn't change anything in relation to mandatory retirement, if you continue to work past 65 and you hit 71 and you're still going strong, ironically, you have to start collecting your pension under CRA rules at 71. Although since there's no mandatory retirement, there's no obligation that you stop working. So there's still this feature, it's just delayed by 6 years, if you will. The other change, and again, this is something that is more forced than something we would have agreed to if we had a free hand in designing the plan. This plan is a difficult result of bargaining. But the option for Queen's employees to take the commuted value rather than a monthly pension. So currently, you hit 65 or whenever you're planning to retire, you go into the pension office and you say, I'm ready to retire, what's my pension going to be? Well, hopefully you've planned a little better than that, but you go in, you say, I'm ready to activate, calculate my monthly pension. And you'll have a number of options. You'll have the option to take a joint survivor with 10-year guarantee or 15-year guarantee or 80% or 100%, and you can look at the Queen's website to see all those different options. But one option that you've had is the option just to take the cash, meaning you take the commuted value, the estimated value of your pension. You can withdraw that, and rather than taking a monthly pension, you get this large volume of the commuted value of your pension. Again, not something that I would certainly promote from a risk-averse perspective, but for some members that has been an attractive option. And that right to withdraw the commuted value will phase out over time after you're 55. So if you leave Queens before you're 55, you'll have the option to take the commuted value. Again, most people are better off deferring their pension, leaving the money in the Queen's plan, and then drawing it as a regular pension annuity at the time of retirement. But this option of taking commuted value phases out over a 10-year period. Over the first 3 years, you can take all the commuted value of both the UPP contributions and your past Queen's benefits. And for the next 7 years, so 10 years total, you'll be able to access the commuted value of your Queen's pension plan. However, after those 10 years, so if the plan begins at its anticipated inception date of 2021, after 2031, you won't be able to take the commuted value as an alternative to taking the monthly pension. Now, we think that these plan design features are very attractive, of creating a defined benefit plan that is of equal or greater value to the hybrid plan, and in fact, being able to secure a defined benefit plan runs against the grain of what most employees in the Canadian workforce have experienced. So this is an attractive option for creating a stable and sustainable plan, given the pressures from government in terms of special solvency, but also given the bargaining pressures of Queen's stated desire to, quote, get out of the pension business. Why? Because the only way to escape those special solvency payments is to enter a jointly sponsored pension plan. And really, there are only two options. So if we're thinking about, what are the options here? The option isn't really, do we stay with the QPP or go with the UPP? It's, do we go with the UPP, or do we experience a tough round of bargaining and be forced into the college plan? As Professor Hansen explained, you pay more and get less. So we think that this is a much better option. But it doesn't mean that we didn't also say that, given some of the loss of choice that we experience and given the increased contributions that employees are asked to make in consenting to convert to this plan, it means that there should be some offsets by the administration to essentially buy our consent into this plan. And so let me cover what those negotiated offsets are. I've already mentioned the harmonization with the normal retirement date. So again, kind of leaving this historical artifact of having to wait until July 1st after you turn 65. The second item is perhaps the most surprising element, and it's something that I've certainly had a change of perspective on. When we were going into consent bargaining and bargaining overall, asking for early unreduced retirement wasn't something that we were necessarily looking at. And I should point out, under the UPP, there is the factor 80 age 60. So if you're age 60 and you've worked for at least 20 years, you can retire without any early retirement penalty. Currently at Queen's, you get docked about 2% of your minimum guarantee pension for each year before 65. So if you retire at 60, your pension for the rest of your life is reduced by at least 10%. And going into bargaining then, there was this assumption, because we tried to get Queen's to agree to early unreduced as part of the plan design. Going into local bargaining, we didn't feel that it was a priority objective. It's an expensive feature to the plan, and as benefits that we've already earned, we haven't been paying for early unreduced retirement, right? So it's an expensive feature. It's written into the contribution rates, and essentially we haven't been paying for it. But ironically enough, the administration put it on the table as an incentive to consent to the pension conversion. Since it wasn't something we asked for, we said, okay, thanks, we'll take it, but we still want what we asked for. And so the next two items were kind of our primary items, but I don't want to downplay the importance of Queens making this move, making a willingness to essentially buy early unreduced or to make that benefit retroactive to all of our earned Queens pension time. Why? Well, part of what we did during bargaining was to request the data on the age of retirement for QUFA members for the last 10 years. And surprisingly, last year, we had as many colleagues retire before age 65 as we had retire at the normal retirement age or older. Now, whether that was a one-year anomaly or whether we'll see kind of a changing pattern in career trajectories for faculty and librarians, I'm not entirely sure, but over that 10-year period, we consistently had 20 to 30% of those retiring before age 65. So I think early unreduced retirement will be much more attractive than we might have guessed just thinking about typical faculty members wanting to work until they, kick us out of our offices. The next item is related to that increase in pension contribution rates that I mentioned earlier. Recall that the contribution rates increased from 7% to 9%, up to 9.2 and 11.5%, or putting that in kind of salary terms, that's about a 2.4% hit on your salary. So we said that there needs to be some offset. So the administration agreed, and we reached a tentative agreement that would include a one-time 1.5% offset for pensionable salary. And that's to your base, so that's an increase to your salary. It's not just a one-time lump sum, but it's a salary increase of 1.5%. So not 100%, but closer to 2/3 of the increase in contribution costs will be offset by this salary increase. The rest of it will be offset by a slightly richer across-the-board increase that we achieved in the final year, but I'll talk about that in just a moment. The other major offset or conversion offset that we wanted was a voluntary phased retirement program. Queens is somewhat unique amongst universities, particularly in the context of no mandatory retirement, of having no program for kind of a dignified plan exit for faculty members to retire from the university. And particularly in the context of losing the right to activate your pension and continue to work, which we know some of our colleagues kind of use that as a self-funded phased retirement program. In the absence of being able to have that option, we felt that a volunteer phased retirement program would be a good alternative, and we saw the University of Toronto's model as an attractive model. The colleagues that we spoke with there have had very good experience with it, and even looking from the administration's viewpoint, there are attractive features of being able to have more effective planning for faculty succession and faculty renewal. So the basic features of the plan is that it's a 3-year irrevocable declaration or irrevocable program. So when you turn 61 or any time before you turn 68, you can say, I want to start my phased retirement next year. You enter this program. And if you think about your workload as being 100% per year, over 3 years your workload would be 300%. Under the program, under the voluntary phased retirement program, you have to work between 150% and 200% of your time. So you can reduce it to 50-50-50 or 75-75-50. And you work those reduced responsibilities, but you continue to accrue your 100% pensionable income. And this is important. Currently, you can reduce your responsibilities under the collective agreement, but your pension time gets reduced as well. Under the voluntary phased retirement, you can work half-time, but still get 100% pension credit for that year of service. And that's incredibly valuable, particularly when you think about end-of-career pension credit when you're likely to have your highest earnings over your career lifetime. The other valuable economic aspect of this was a salary bonus. So a 75% of salary bonus is paid out. It's paid out in there's a couple of options for how you get it paid out. You can take it, a third for each year to kind of make up some of the lost earnings from reducing your responsibility and taking a prorated salary. Or you can take it as a bonus paid out at the end of the 3 years as a retirement allowance. And we have those two models because there's some tax advantages for taking it as a retirement bonus rather than having it added to your T4 over the 3-year period. Again, this is what we think will be a very attractive program. In fact, the administration thought it would be too attractive. So one agreement that we made is in order to prevent a rush on the exits, the dean can delay entry into the phased retirement program for up to a year for people who are under 65. So let's say half your department wants to enter the voluntary phased retirement program. They can kind of withhold and stagger that over a couple of years. But unlike the retirement incentives enacted back in 2010, where there were these strict limitations of one person per unit, that was not part of this voluntary phase program. Everyone has the right to go into it, provided you haven't already activated your pension or you're not already over 68. Now, the top rate for 68 is because you have to start collecting your pension at 71, so your phased retirement would not fall within that window before you turn 71. The other thing I should highlight are what are the basic elements for the renewal of the collective agreement. So as Professor Hansen was explaining, this was a combined round of bargaining of local consent to pension conversion combined with our normal renewal of the collective agreement. And part of what made this round of bargaining different is that it really focused on pension offsets and the monetary aspects of collective agreement renewal. So you won't see me highlighting any language changes because most of those were enshrined in memorandums of agreement that will continue to be worked out over time. So there aren't language changes to present here today. The monetary agreements are modest, 1.6, 1.6, 1.9. Those represent the across-the-board increases, so those apply to salary, to stipends, to professional expense reimbursements, all the normal things that are adjusted with an ATB, with an across-the-board increase, are enhanced in that way. And we put the 1.9% at the end of the 3 years because that's the year if the pension conversion is approved and the new contribution rates go into effect, you combine the 1.5% one-time salary offset with the 1.9%, you get 3.5%. So you still will see about a 1% increase in your paycheck, although you'll have a lot more money going into your pension at that time. We maintain the anomaly side table, not with a lot of money, but with the principle that we will continue to monitor, ensure that Queens doesn't, as we know most organizations do, slip back into patterns of anomalous salary based upon gender or other factors. And by having a little pot of money, it allows us to continue to have those mechanisms of accountability. Finally, the last piece is perhaps small but important in terms of recognizing the contributions of our colleagues who are promoted from continuing adjunct to associate professor. So they go through the same tenure process as all of us, and we know that many of them, certainly to achieve promotion, they have to have a robust program of research, and none of them are eligible for academic leaves, and this creates kind of a first step in recognizing their research contributions by granting or creating the opportunity for them to achieve a half-course teaching release if they receive external research grant within 3 years of their promotion. So that's the main elements, and let me turn it to our web monitors to see if we have any questions. No questions? Well, let me just finish then with an overview of how the ratification procedure and consent voting will go. The ratification procedure won't start until February 9th, and we chose that date because Toronto and Guelph complete their voting on February 8th. So the idea is that you'll be able to see exactly how our two sister universities do in terms of their consent votes, and it'll be an electronic, third-party independent voting system by simply voting. You'll receive an email with your, sign-in and password, and you'll be asked a single question for kind of two issues. Do you agree to the changes to the collective agreement and the consent to convert to the UPP? The wording is much more sophisticated than that, but essentially it's, do you agree to the renewal of the collective agreement and consent to the conversion from the QPP to the UPP? And as Elizabeth explained earlier, they're tied together because this package is all contingent upon QUFA's providing consent to move from the QPP to the UPP. If consent is not provided, what happens? Well, we go back to the drawing board, and I think it would be a difficult drawing board, to say the least, given the recent announcement of 10% cut to tuition. So the bargaining environment has gotten much worse since we reached this tentative agreement. The outcome will determine how QUFA consents or does not consent. The ratification will determine that, and QUFA will base its consent upon the members' mandate. In addition to today's webinar, you'll have lots of materials to take a deeper dive on in terms of specific elements of the proposed university pension plan. If you have kind of individual questions, let's say you have some time with another pension that you brought with you to Queen's, or you have slightly more complex individual questions, I strongly encourage you to connect with Bob Weisnagel. He's the director of the Queen's Pension Office. He's been helping our colleagues retire for over 20 years now, and of course he has access to your entire employee file and can provide you with very detailed advice and answer those individual questions.